Briefly talk about your success journey. After Harvard and MIT degrees, you were off to Silicon Valley, where you were very much involved as a venture capitalist. What were those days like?
Silicon Valley wasn't even known as a Silicon Valley when I moved there. It's a little known fact, but National Geographic gave it that name. They did a story on Steve Jobs and the semiconductor and Apple back in the day, and I moved there about the time this came out. In fact, I was inspired by the cover story because I used to read Nat Geo. But when I moved there, it was very small. It's mostly semiconductors. But there was this thing called venture capital, and I did 3 startups. I wasn't the founder. The first 2 failed terribly, and there's some good stories amongst that. But the third one was Sun Microsystems, a very successful computer company. And I was there when it went public. And my role at Sun at the time allowed me to meet and work with some of the bankers and the people that were writing the S-1, the document that the SEC requires. So I was introduced to these things called venture capitalists. And I met John Doerr, the very famous John Doerr that we all have read about in the New York Times and stuff. And I was living with a guy who graduated from Stanford and went into venture capital. So I was getting it from all sides. And one day my boss, Carol Bartz, came down and said, you know, Ray, we really think you're grooming nicely. You've got a future here, but you probably should go to business school. So I went to business school and decided I wanted to be a VC. So from there, it was 1988. There'd been a crash in '87. There weren't many slots available, but I was a little older student, a little more mature student, and I had a few connections. So I managed to land this job with the Rockefeller Family, Venrock, in New York City. I remember I was a newly wedded man. My wife Meredith and I had met at Sun, which was very typical for a successful company. You work such long hours, your whole life is wrapped up in the company. Anyway, so I promised her when we graduated from Harvard that we'd be south or west from like Dallas, Denver, Seattle, and we wound up in New York City. So she forgave me ultimately. But anyway, so I came to New York. And 10 years later, I wound up in Silicon Valley running Venrock's office there, and eventually, became the managing partner and retired in, what would that be, 2013 or something. So it was I started in the Valley, went and got some education, went and worked with one of the best firms in the nation in New York City, where I learned enormous. Look, I'm from Texas. New York is a foreign country. And then I migrated back to the Valley right when the internet was happening, which, timing is everything, they say.